All right, hold on. Let me pour out my whiskey, guys.
But what have you been doing all day?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Um, I've been working, man. I'm just like been
Yeah.
working. So ironically enough, there's some people in the business where they're like in lockdown, like they're going through probably the roughest time in recent memory, and yet like their job is actually to help and support and serve and do stuff for the rest of the geo, which is like up and running, right? So it's ironic that like we've been up and running for the last couple of years and we benefited for that, like and like when all that good stuff was happening, no one was complaining, right? And then now we've gone through a few weeks of rough times, but the question is like, what if like things just magically improve in a couple of weeks, right? And like we know Shanghai is like this awesome place, and like in a couple of weeks it goes back to pretty much normal. There's still some restrictions, but you can kind of do your thing, you can see your friends. Like at that point, are people going to hold a grudge, or are they going to be like, oh whew, I'm glad that was over, and wasn't that big of a deal? Just like my horrific experience, like back in the US and all that stuff. I thought it was so bad at the time, but I look back, I'm like, a piece of cake, wasn't a big deal.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, right? My opinion is I think this will have some lingering effects even after when everything goes back to normal. But you did bring up another good point, what you said first, and this is just the way I see it. It's like I just think like with all like the complaining and all the negative emotions flying around, and some of it understandably so and justifiably. But like, I just feel like I think this is just our turn to bite the bullet. Like you said, we've had it so good living the high life for the last couple years in Shanghai here. Everything normal, business is up and running, going out, nightlife, everything, right? And and while and during that time while we were living the high life, like a lot of the rest of the world were going through some like kind of what we're going through now, not exactly the same, but they were locked down. They were dealing with massive social division and unrest for a bunch of various reasons. I mean, it was a bad time, right? And we were just kind of like sitting back, living the high life while they're kind of like going through that shit. And I just think now is our turn. We talk so much on this show about like not getting so zoomed in and looking at something like so pixelated. And I think if we zoom out a little bit and look at the overall situation, overall body of work to speak for, like we've had it pretty good. And now it's just our turn at the plate to kind of eat one, take one for the team, so to speak, and it's a frustrating situation for sure. I'm not saying it's not. But I mean, that's just the lens I put it in, and I feel like that helps me kind of contextualize everything.
Well, without getting too like on the other side and digging ourselves into a hole, but don't you think what you just said right there is a little bit zoomed in because you're kind of like just talking about your own kind of situation
Oh, for
and how
sure, for sure. Granted, I can't speak for everybody. There are plenty of people here, I'm sure, that are going through much, much shittier situations than we are. And but I mean, I can't speak for them. I don't know what they're going through. I can't relate to what they're going through. So I'm not. What I can do is I can speak from what I see and from my vantage point, the people I've talked to, and that seems to be the case. Now, I say that knowing that half the people I talk to are kind of up in arms and like really fucking pissed off about this entire situation, which is again is completely understandable. But then the other half is a little more empathetic with the situation. It sucks. No one likes it, obviously, but they're kind of like, yeah, let's just bite the bullet and get through this kind of thing. And the other half is just like really just every day, like negativity, complaining, and
yeah.
and just going crazy.
I want to poke fun at you, Justin.
Yeah, go ahead.
So like, well, I mean, you talk about like, oh, like I talked to all these people, and like like it's kind of like you're giving everyone this impression that you've got this like this this massive like group of people that you're just busy all the time talking to everybody every day. Like you won't even talk to us. You know what I'm saying? Like we had our when Howie and I like message you, we're like basically like when we message you, we're just kind of checking to see if you're still alive, you know, if you're still like engaging them in the world. You're like, oh,
Yeah,
you know, I've talked to, you know, there's 26 million people. I've talked to at least 8 million of them. So I've got a pretty good pulse of the situation, right? Like, it's just, it's funny to us because it's not like of all the people we know, you are like the most introverted person. And like, we're kind of like, we might not hear from you for like weeks, you know? And then all of a sudden you're Mr. like social butterfly, just going out there, like doing your own Gallup surveys.
Gallup survey.
Like Justin actually works like moonlights for like CNN and Fox News, like doing their surveys.
Shots fired.
I can see Justin
fired.
right now. He's already like cocking back, getting ready for another release. But anyway, you know, I want to make a quick comment about what you're saying because, you know, it's funny. I don't know if I told you this story, but I was kind of like for the first, I would say, week of the lockdown. It was just pretty much normal for me in terms of the way I was going through. I was just, you know, abiding by the rules, doing the COVID tests, all that stuff, right? Everything was fine. It was just what you would expect out of a lockdown where you can't leave your home. Now, yes, where there are some inconveniences when it comes to like trying to get like food and stuff like that, sure. But, you know, we made it happen. So in terms of like my own personal bubble, it was all right. It was not like anything crazy, right? Now you see all these stories on social media getting spread of pockets of bad stuff happening, right? But they were not literally hitting me directly. And then the friends and whoever I talked to, it seemed to be pretty similar. And it wasn't until about 7 days in, like a little more than 7 days in, like 10 days in, I would say. Now I'm in my like company group chat, right? And we're in the middle of doing a project, right? So we had a meeting, internal meeting, and we called on everybody. Now we have like some other people in staff that were in lockdown before the official one, right? They were already at home for like a week or two. Now, one of the guys who's been in his house for a long time, all of a sudden, he just goes, yeah, I can't make the meeting. And we're like, why not? He's like, I have to go get shuttled to quarantine center. We're like, oh, you're positive. He's like, no, my roommate is, but I'm getting shipped out because of close contact. And so I gotta go. And then we're like, so once again, we didn't think anything of it. We have other coworkers that got shipped out as well. So we're like, okay, well, you know, good luck and let us know how it is and stuff like that. But then he says some stuff that made me go, what the fuck? He goes, it's just in time actually because I'm on my last bag of ramen, right? And so we started digging in. We're like, last bag of ramen? You mean you have other stuff though, right? He's like, no, literally, if I finish this ramen, I have 0 things I can eat in my refrigerator, in my pantry. I have nothing. We're like, oh, shit. Wait, how are you left with nothing? And then we start digging in. Now, we've always asked him, like, is everything okay? He will be like, yep. He just doesn't talk so much, you know what I mean? So then we start digging in. We're like, what do you mean you only have 1 bag of ramen? Wait, so what about like the supplies that get sent to everybody in the whole city? He's like, yeah, I only got 1 of those. And that was right in the beginning. And that got, you know, used up pretty quickly. And I haven't got any other ones. We're like, oh, shit. And we're like, what about like the group buys? Everybody's doing group buys. You're telling me you're not doing group buys? He's like, well, I live in a smaller community. And yes, there were some group buys happening, but they always got canceled because there were either not enough food orders or for some other reason. They just got canceled. So I never got any of my group buys in. We're like, whoa, all of a sudden it's like reality setting in. And then we're like, you literally, he's like, I've been in lockdown for 28 days. All I've eaten pretty much is instant noodles and a couple of instances of veggies. That's it. And we're like, holy shit. And then all of a sudden, you know, once again, reality's setting in. And then he's like, look, I gotta go. I'll talk to you guys when I get to the quarantine center. So then a couple of hours go by. He arrives there. It's a hotel. And he goes in. It's a nice hotel. It's decent. And then he shows a photo of his first meal. and it's got some meat, it's got some greens, it's got some rice. And the one line he says that just made me go, "Oh shit." He's like, "I'm about to cry because this is the first meal I have that's well rounded in 28 days, you know?"
And
And
that
so
was
it's
in
like,
that was in the that was in the quarantine center.
well, because he's not positive, he's part of like the close contact, so he got shipped out to another place, which is more like a hotel as opposed to like, the big like, warehouses that you've seen. It's a little different.
Yeah. So Howie, like, it sounds like what you said like sparked some thoughts, right? Like, I mean, so number one, it sounds like when you heard this, like it was a bit of an emotional experience for you because like, your compassion, your empathy, like someone that and like, sometimes you're not aware of like what people are going through. And I think
Yeah.
that, like a normal person, like here's this, and then you kind of feel that. And I had like I think we all had similar experiences, especially Justin, because he's talked to about 8 million people, so he had a pretty good wide range of people.
8.5 million.
Like
8.5.
yeah, but like I've been trying to like just figure out like how to think about all this stuff, like, and use the principles that we've talked about on the show, and like just think more clearly, and like bring some of the like the right decision filters and frameworks to things, so that like when people ask me about this stuff, I've got a clear point of view, and like I sound credible, right? Like, you can read economists, you can read like the Western media, you can read the local stuff. There's like, like infinite amount of sources where people are sharing like different perspectives and stuff. And, like I have colleagues in other parts of the world, and, they're really caring and warm. And, sometimes in the beginning of the call we'll be in a meeting, and then they'll be like, hey, like here's the situation in Shanghai. And by the way, Eric, can you share a little bit? You're on the ground, and we really, we are thinking about you. Right. And so, I kind of just share some things here and there. But what you said kind of made me think, right? So like zooming out a little bit. So think about the 26 million people in Shanghai. Now, before the pandemic, before the lockdown, think about how many of these people were healthy and how many of them were actually sick. Okay. I mean, and then think about if you could take a snapshot of everyone's lunch or dinner, and what would that look like? Because there were probably people during that time that were like on their last bag of ramen too, just because out of 26 million people, it's a pretty prosperous city, but there's probably some people really down on their luck, right? So it's really interesting to think about before the lockdown, what the city was like. Obviously, there's tons and tons of rich people, and and the overall standard of living is pretty high. But I imagine that there's some people still struggling in society, but we don't always think of them, right? Because we're just kind of caught up in our own world. And then let's look at the lockdown itself, right? Why is this causing such like tremendous reaction within the people that live in Shanghai who love this city? Is because we haven't been in a situation in recent memory where like people, like an average person, who normally has enough to eat, is like literally on their last bag of ramen, where people are like starving and where people are going through really tough times. So imagine you could take a snapshot every single day of all 26 million meals in Shanghai, and you can kind of see what that looks like compared to before the lockdown, to get a picture of what's going on. So I imagine that there's just like, what we're trying to say is that there's a wide range of experiences, and that people normally who have enough to eat actually have been put into a situation, almost like a man-made situation, where like food and basic survival becomes somewhat questionable, right? And then you ask yourself, has anyone in the 26 million people actually starved to death in Shanghai? That's a really interesting question, right? Like maybe some people have starved, but the reality is like none of us know anyone who's actually starved to death. So I'm not saying that people aren't going through really tough shit, because I have friends where like when I heard their circumstances, like where they were really running out of food, like I was like, tears were in my eyes. At the same time, it's like, has anyone actually starved? So it's like the question really for me is, like, when we look at all 26 million people, what's the real situation of like how many people are truly struggling to the point where they're never going to recover from the lockdown because something health wise, or something where it's permanent damage versus just like temporary damage, right? Like Justin, you said like inconvenienced. And then I also want to ask, compared to the other parts of the world, like did what they go through in terms of the length of time and in terms of how strict the lockdowns were and the impact on their life, was it actually a lot better than what we're going through now, or was it something similar?
Well, I think it's a case by case basis, right? Because just like what you're saying right now, I mean, we can speak from our own personal experience and what we're going through first and second degree. Same thing if you want to compare to America. I can, use my friends or people I've talked to. It could be a very different response than your friends and who you talk to. So you can't generalize like the whole country, right? The experience of the country based off of your first and second degree of experience. And I think that's one of the biggest things that it's like a human condition for us to fall into that trap. It's just to believe what we see and what we feel because that's what we can see. I mean, that's tangible. But it's like the intangibles outside of that circle becomes like this, almost like a boogeyman. So it really is. It just depends on like, can you really stop and think about, what is really happening beyond what you see and what you feel, beyond your own, your first perspective. I think that's the biggest concern I have with people's reactions.
What you're saying is it's anecdotal, right? We don't have like science, like we don't have a way of like really understanding, the bigger picture, right? Like we have anecdotal evidence, right? We've talked to certain people, but is it truly representative? Like you actually, like we talk about, you need data. And so it's like, how do we, because what we automatically want to do, like, so everyone is automatically comparing, if you think about it, right? So some people are saying this is like way worse than anything anyone's gone through, right? They're like, because they're in it. And so like it's right in front of them, like, their life has been impacted and they're like, man, this shit that we're going through in Shanghai is like worse than anything ever, right? Like you have people in that extreme. And then you have, maybe people that say, this is not that big of a deal, right? Like fast forward a month and everything will be fine, right? No permanent damage, right? And then there's some people who are like, no, there's going to be permanent damage because there's collateral damage. So like for all the lives that we're saving, because of the COVID prevention, there are all kinds of other impacts in lives that are, lives being lost because these people can't get treatment or whatever it is, the stress of the pandemic. So like, it's, it's interesting to see like how you compare and what measurements you use. And I don't think anyone really has any good measurements right now.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is that, going back to what you said, there is no one truth because everyone is having their own experience. And as you said, those experiences are varying greatly. And I think what I would say is that in terms of believing what you see, it's also a two-way street in that if you look at the media and social media and you're going through the whole like Shanghai lockdown rabbit hole, I mean, we've talked about this so many times on this show, is that social media is just literally a highlight reel of all the worst, most terrible, extreme situations. Those are the things that are going to go viral. Those are the things that are going to stick and people want to see. And so if you put on a constant loop of this highlight reel of all the worst of the Shanghai lockdown, it's very understandable and easy to see why people will see that and be like, wow. And I think that's also kind of like that two-way street that I think we all need to exercise in understanding what we're looking at when we are kind of stuck in this social media lens that often people are.
Yeah, let me make a comment, and I want to get your guys' feedback. So, just like you, I got hit up by a bunch of friends as well, and I always respond with one line first, which is, same thing. They ask, are you okay? Do you have enough food? Same thing, right? And then they're like, because from the media that I've watched, from the news reports that I've watched, it's like the second coming. It's you guys are about to go down, you know. Um, and basically I always write back. I said, look, if you're basing off of media, the media is only going to report the extremes, just like you said. It's not the norm. It's not the norm. If it was the norm, I feel like I would be seeing those stories directly, whether it's first or second degree. But it's not the norm. So I'm getting those news feeds just like you are, as opposed to literally knowing that it's fact. So that's one side, right? So I agree with you on that. But the second side is, okay, well, with that being said, I mean, it is true that there are these instances that I think we all can agree on that are, maybe not so acceptable. So, if that's the case, then, what is that limit then? Like, where is that line drawn?
When I see these terrible and disturbing videos myself, and just like you, I have not come across any of this directly or secondhand um, in my experience here so far. But obviously they're happening. And, a lot of these videos are going viral in China as well. So it's like shocking a lot of, Shanghainese and Chinese residents as well. So, I mean, I think I put it through the lens of like let's say like take a topic like police brutality or mass shootings in the United States. And like a lot of Chinese people I've realized recently have this really distorted image of America where they think, oh, you go there, you're Chinese, you're going to be
Oh
a
yeah.
victim of a hate crime. Like that's automatic. Like you're going to be a victim of a hate crime or you're going to get shot or the police are going to beat you up or you're going to be a victim of a mass shooting somewhere. And it's like that same mechanism that's happening, but it's happening on the other going the other way as well. So whereas a lot of Chinese people, they're on Chinese social media and all they see are the mass shootings, the police beatings, the racial hate crimes against Asians, blah blah blah. So in their minds, they think that's all America is. And
Well,
when
America
I
sees
talk
that
to
too.
them, yeah, America sees that too, just like we see terrible videos here as well. And what I have to stop and say to them is like, you can't paint all of America with that brush. Like us having grown up there, we know that that's not the norm. That does not represent what it's like to live in America. Yes, those things are happening, just like terrible things are happening here. But you cannot just paint the whole situation in society and country as that.
So, yeah, of course, there's going to be. I also, like I said to everybody else, what you're seeing, what you're hearing about all the crazy shit is just a small percentage. It's not the majority. It's not the norm. I don't believe it's the norm. You know.
So you had mentioned that you had a coworker that was shuttled to quarantine. You have a your business partner who went into central quarantine, right?
Yeah, the real
Ha-
the real quarantine.
the real central quarantine. Have you checked up on them? Like, what is their status now?
Yeah. So the coworker that went 28 days, basically only eating ramen, and now is crying over it being able to have 3 meals a day of full meat and veggies and
So he actually
and your
enjoys the
starches.
quarantine, or what? Does he still enjoy it, or was it just that first day?
It's an upgrade to him.
Okay.
Yeah, because he actually has, steady food. And he has to stay indoors anyway. He has his computer, he has his phone. I mean, what else does he need? You're in lockdown, you're in quarantine, you know. So for him, it's he's actually in better spirits, you know. I mean, if you compare it to what his living conditions were before, he was living with 3 other roommates in a very small apartment. Now he's living with one other person in a hotel room, and it's an upgrade to him. So on that side, he's okay. And then the business partner who's in the quarantine, because he's COVID positive, and that quarantine center, he shared photos. I wouldn't wish anybody upon to go through that.
Well, it's like a refugee
Um,
center, right? Kind of like akin to a
yeah,
refugee center.
I mean, to put it politely, it's pretty bad. um,
Like what kind
yeah,
of bad?
so
Like, can you elaborate more? Because like you've
yeah, I
spoken to
mean,
him firsthand.
no, I mean he shared photos. It's just like really shitty beds. The walls are crumbling. The bathrooms are so nasty, like I could not even look at it. Um, People are just like coughing, no medication. It's just it's just a bad situation.
Hmm.
And he tested, and then he went in positive, but then he tested negative after 2 days, 3 days. So in other words, he's already like he was already like positive for like 10 days when they finally put him in. And so he tested negative after a couple of days, and multiple times, and it didn't matter. Like he has to serve the 14 days. So he was like, it's funny. He's so dispirited. He was like, I don't give a fuck. It's like, I mean, I have to stay here. If I catch it again, then I catch it again. But it's nothing you can do. So, yeah, it's just like, you have a lot of negative stories out there too. And I mean,
is he still there?
He's literally
Which
still
day?
there, and we're like, it's like day 16 for him now. So it's actually beyond the 14. So he doesn't even know what's going on. So yeah, it's very dispiriting, and like it's like every time I talk to him, and I have to talk to him a lot, because we're within projects and stuff like that, and he just doesn't even talk. He's just like, yeah, whatever. I'm like, well, how is it? And he's like, what's there to talk about? I'm like, okay, well, have you been talking with other people? He's like, what's there to talk about? He's just like very dispirited.
he's just over it. He's completely over it.
He's very over it.
Well, that's of the things of the dialogue that I've seen, right? Again, very limited, but of the dialogue I've seen in terms of the negativity and when people are saying like this whole thing is kind of a joke, more times than not, they're referring to like the central quarantine methods and
100%.
saying like,
yeah,
it's usually about the quarantine methods because they're saying like people who are like initially test negative and they go in and then they test positive after in there because of course you're stuck in with all these other people that are sick and you're breathing the same air, and it's like the whole system is backwards in that like it's not like really, it doesn't make any sense in terms of why you're going in there, how long you're in there for, and like people who are perfectly fine are getting sick in there, or like who are like go in there for a period of time, then they like your friend, like your business partner, go in there, they start testing negative multiple times, but then they test positive again because they're like in that environment again. So it's like I think that is a lot of the criticism around that I've been hearing is really aimed at the system of the quarantine. And I mean that sounds like a huge failure, a huge like dropping of the ball in terms of from an organizational standpoint of kind of like the Shanghai government.
Yeah, there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there. I don't think like we need to talk about it on the show, but I mean there's a lot of reasons that people have been talking about of why this is going on, why Shanghai dropped the ball. Obviously very political. But like, there's nothing that we can really dig in. We're not in the know. So, it is just speculation.
You guys want to check the group? The Honest Drinkers group. Let's give a shout out to all the honest drinkers.
Yeah, the honest drinkers. We really kicked up a hornet's nest.
Yeah, look at the honest drinkers, man. Blowing up.
No, but this is why I said in the beginning that it's just our turn to kind of bite the bullet, not just with the lockdown, but with a lot of the division. Like, I try to stay off my phone these days in terms of just, I don't want this kind of feed of negativity in my mind while I'm trying to get through this lockdown. I'm trying to stay positive. But in the chats that I do see, really, really divided. Really, really super divided, right? And I just think like a lot of the countries that we've criticized, even on the show, European countries and America, and we've commented on what's going on there and what's been going on. And we always talk about this division, politically, socially, right? And I think that it's just like, this is just our turn to kind of go through that bout of like division, where people stand, whether, in America, it was like vax versus anti-vax, whether you supported Fauci or you hated Fauci, blah, 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 right? And this is just our own version of that, like there's so many key topics that people are debating right now, really heated debates and completely legitimate, valid debates, like whether the zero COVID policy is working. I mean, that's a legitimate debate, right? Whether how this lockdown is being handled in terms of, are people empathetic to it, or are you just like really against it? And that's a really divided camp as well. There are plenty of people that are empathetic towards the lockdown. Not that they like the lockdown, no one does. But then there's another camp that's just like really bitterly against the lockdown, also understandably so. And I think this is just our time to go through that division. I mean, we've been a pretty harmonious culture, especially Shanghai, for a long time.
You know, like I get that. I think like I'm trying to figure out some of the overarching themes, right? Where I'm not actually thinking about division. I'm not thinking about like either or, right? Like, and what I'm thinking is, you know, I don't look at it as like A versus B, or like, you know, this viewpoint versus this viewpoint. I feel like in that scenario, people have already made their decision. And so like they made their decision based on the information they have. You know, maybe they don't have all the facts, and maybe it's a very emotional thing, you know, and we've seen that division. You know, Democrat, Republican, like East versus West, Russia versus Ukraine. But for whatever reason, that's not how my brain works. And I don't see it that way. For me, I'm just trying to understand, if someone's going to ask me about the situation, like how do I not become the CNN and the Fox News and the whoever it is, and how do I, you know, give the most balanced, honest, you know, authentic take on things and leave a lot of room for what I don't know. And so it's a lot of it's just like, you know, asking questions. Like, so for instance, um, you know, when you're thinking about operating a large company or even a government, right, there's a lot of different decision filters that you have to use. So like, for instance, if the government is thinking about what COVID policies to consider, and I mean any country, they have to look at, for instance, you know, the science, the transmission rates. They have to look at mortality rates. They have to look at all the different kinds of trade-offs between like the social impact, the economic impact, all these things. Every government looks at these things. They weigh them and weight them in different ways. And then ultimately like policy comes out of it, you know. And some governments are very balanced in their approach, you know, like without knowing the details, but, you know, like from friends that I know that are pretty, you know, well versed in this stuff, it seems like the Singapore government, you know, has had a pretty balanced approach in really following the science. There's other countries that really have to weigh the science versus sort of the political implications. And just because a policy is good doesn't mean like everyone in the country is going to buy in, right? Like, you know, like we talked, you guys mentioned anti-vaxxers. So let's assume that, you know, vaccination is a good thing and it really helps. But just because the government says that, the scientists say that, doesn't mean tomorrow, if I implement a policy that says, if you're not vaccinated, you can't go to the restaurant, it doesn't actually mean that's a good policy, because you also have to consider like, you know, human behavior and like reality, right? So like, in my mind, I'm not thinking either or. I haven't actually made a decision on, you know, and I don't know if I'll ever have a point of view, or if I'll ever be smart enough or knowledgeable enough to even have a point of view. But in my mind, it's kind of like, I don't know what the best approach is, right? Like, I think that every government has to have key decision filters. Ideally, they're transparent about these decision filters so that when they're communicating with the public, they're not changing course every single day, right? I think like that really hurt us in the US. It was like, first it was like, you know, like, okay, we're going to get herd immunity, you know, and we got to like flatten the curve and all this stuff, right? And then like that turned out to not exactly be true, because like what herd immunity? No, like Omicron just like blew away herd immunity, right? So things kind of changed. So, you know, for me, like how the government communicates, what policies are there, I think all of these things are things that I'm actually just curious about. And so like when my friends ask me, or when people ask me how it's going, I'm trying to like be as balanced as I can, and also let them know that I don't know everything. But here is a wide range, and the I guess, you know, what's the dynamic range of experiences right now in lockdown is probably larger than the normal dynamic range, right? So like the worst case in lockdown is probably worse than, you know, like non-lockdown situations, right? So more people are starving, and more people are having difficulty getting food, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like, for us, it's really like, how do we bring some objectivity to it, rather than, you know, highlighting the divisions? Like, okay, yeah, there's always going to be different beliefs and stuff like that. I just want to start asking the question, right? I think we love to polarize and point fingers at each other, and create all of these divisions, and kind of like activate all of our unconscious bias. But when you really step back, it's kind of like, well, how do we look at this objectively? Like if you were a Chinese policy maker, what's the best way to sort of look at it? And of course, we know that in every place there's going to be like political concerns. And so then when people ask me these questions, I tell them my knowledge is limited. My viewpoint is constantly evolving. I'm heavily impacted like emotionally, but here's sort of like the picture. Here's some of the worst that I see. Here's some of the best I see. And if you want to kind of understand, here's sort of an average. And it's actually a dialogue, because I'm like, well, what have you read? And so like, like people looking from the outside sometimes have a really good viewpoint as well, because they can be objective about certain things. So that's a little bit of how I'm looking at it, but it's evolving. Like I don't claim to be, like, none of us are experts, but I just don't want to get so caught up in it. Right. I just want to have like I'm going to live my life and try to do the best I can. And you guys know that like I was in some kind of lockdown for like 3 or 4 months. So it really prepared me for this. Now, I have to admit, had I gone straight into this lockdown from the previous, Free Willy Eric, I might not be like this. I might not be so casual and carefree, but I did go through some other pretty like tough times, and I had to go through some of those ups and downs.
Yeah. Just to kind of go back to what I meant and how you even asked this in terms of like, what did I mean about pointing out this division? I don't mean that you have to take a side. In fact, that's the opposite of what I mean. What I'm saying is, I think, like, you guys have known me enough to know that I think all this division and bickering back and forth and pointing fingers is absolutely useless. I mean, you have to have better things to think about during your day, other than these things that you can't control anyway and that are above your kind of base of knowledge. What I mean by pointing out kind of this is kind of our turn at the division is giving hope that just like all the other countries before us, that when we were good and we were, everything was normal here and we were kind of all comfy sitting in Shanghai, we were looking out at other countries and kind of pointing that finger and we're like, oh, look at that division. Well, they've moved past that, mostly. Like, there's still division. There will always be division in society, but they've moved past it. They've gotten out of it. And if you talk to a lot of people in the States now, which I have, they all tell me like, yeah, shit's back to normal. Like, there are 300,000 people attending Coachella this year, right? And like a major outdoor festival. I'm watching the NBA playoffs. All the arenas are fully packed. No one's wearing masks, right?
No one's wearing masks. Yeah. Airplanes and trains.
They just lifted the mask mandate on airline travel, right? So it's like they went through some pretty dark times in terms of that division, and they still are, but I feel like they're reaching the other side now. And that's what I'm saying about us in terms of zooming out and looking at this division. It's like, I think a lot of people, and maybe it's just the chats that I'm in, that I see a lot of people it's just negativity and arguing back and forth. And we see that even in our own Honest Drinkers chat. And my thing is like, if we just take a step back and look at this is always going to be human behavior, especially when a historic event or a crisis event kind of occurs. Everyone's going to be like having their own opinions, having their own beliefs, pointing fingers, blah, blah, blah. Everyone's upset. Everyone's frustrated. But it's like, if we step back as observers, it's like, it gives me hope. It's like, you know what? This is now, and we're biting the bullet. This is our turn. But this is going to pass, just like it's passed for so many other countries, right? And we will get to the other side of this. This is just kind of like a phase that we have to go through. That's just natural to go through because of the situation we're in.
But at what cost?
But at what cost? But what's I don't know. I think for me, and I don't know how you guys think about this, but I think a lot of I think in terms of the camps that are divided, in terms of people who are really resistant, like bitterly resistant to this whole lockdown thing that's happening right now, and the people who are more empathetic, I think if we look at the demographic of that, even within the local Chinese, Shanghainese kind of residential demographic, they're split amongst themselves. There are plenty of Shanghai residents who are just like, this is a joke. Like, this is terrible. The Shanghai government really dropped the ball on this. And then there are some who are a little more like empathetic to it, be like, look, they're trying the best they can, they have good intentions, blah, blah, blah. But when I look at least from what I see, the foreigner community and the expat community, almost 100% is bitterly against this, which is
Negative.
really interesting. Yeah, very negative. And that's an interesting point and to note. And, a lot of them, like what you mentioned before, Howie, is like a lot of them are kind of leaving Shanghai, like for good, right? And it's like this mass exodus of foreigners and expats leaving Shanghai, being like, fuck this. I don't want anything to do with this anymore. There's a lot of people who have open businesses here, and from their perspective, they're like, I can't run a business if there's no like safety in terms of any like kind of stability here. Like if we're just gonna be locked down, how can I run a business? It's not, it's not conducive to me in that aspect, and they're leaving for those reasons. And so I think like, and even we got a question even in our Honest Drinkers chat, someone, I forget who, kind of reached out to us and asked us this. And I think this is kind of like the bottom line question that's weighing, especially on a lot of the foreigner community's minds, is that, okay, well, after this lockdown is lifted, do we stay in China or do we not? Is it worth it to stay here or not? And I think that is kind of a bottom line question that especially a lot of people in the foreign community are kind of facing and wrestling with right now.
So it's a big conversation right now. I mean, at least personally for me, in a couple of the group chats that I'm in that have a majority foreigner base group chats, you have a lot of conversation about leaving, but not like, at least I'm not in any group chats where it's like everybody's like that. I would say there's a few people that have said it. They're like, yeah, I'm gonna look into options and stuff like that. It's pretty civil about it. It's not like anything overboard. And these are group chats with hundreds of people in it. I have seen a lot of the bitterness and like anger, and just making jokes out of everything. Like, this is one big joke. Like, this is ridiculous. This is like a big joke. So that's definitely going on. But I mean, I don't see too much of like, in terms of like straight up anger and like some of the stuff, other maybe videos that have been leaked or other information that has been leaked from other foreigners. So I don't know. I think there is, there, just like any other news and social media like spreads that we see. You're seeing the uppermost exaggerations. The worst of the worst situations, and then you kind of put that into you kind of look at that through the lens of that exaggeration as the norm. So I don't think it's the norm. I'm sure there are a lot of foreigners that want to leave. I'm sure the foreigners that want to leave have voiced themselves on maybe internet forums and stuff like that. But, in general, I don't think it's like a mass exodus so far, at least that I feel from my group chats. What about you guys?
Well, I think like we'll see, right? Time will tell. Like actions will speak louder than words, right? And for all the kind of judging and criticizing, complaining, and just negativity, I think a lot of people have right now about the lockdown. I think we will see at the end of the day whether they choose to stay in Shanghai or leave. And I think that action alone will speak more than anything that, we could say or they could say right now or we can read into. And I think that's perfectly fine. Like, look, like I'm like over getting worked up about this kind of stuff. And my viewpoint is like this lockdown is affecting everybody in a different way, and everyone is going to be impacted by it in a different way. And I think after this lockdown, everyone should be making the decisions for themselves of what would be best for them and their families. So if they honestly think that leaving Shanghai or leaving China altogether will be beneficial to them and they'll have better opportunities outside, then of course they should make that decision. If they choose to stay, that's also saying a lot and saying that, well, despite the frustrations of this lockdown, they are still choosing to stay here, which could only say that after weighing out the pros and cons, that they believe that there are more pros than cons in staying here, and vice versa if they leave, right? So I mean, I just think like we'll see, like we'll see. But I'm not trying to pick a side right now. All I'm saying is I think that's something very interesting to keep an eye on, even after this lockdown, because I'd be very curious as to see how many people do leave and how many people decide to stay.
Yeah, like I hadn't really thought about that one. Like in that same way, right? I thought about something maybe relevant or related to that, because like whether or not people stay or not, I suppose like I doesn't really matter too much to me. Only if those people were my friends, right? So like like as far as like the greater population goes, like people come in and out of the city, and there's always that kind of flow. When policies change, I mean, this is a particular policy, but you can imagine around the world, like policies happen all the time. When Chinese people were in the U.S., they passed all the Chinese exclusion acts and stuff like that. And then, I like in some ways that's probably a lot worse than what we're going through, right? Because they literally just said like, we don't want you in our country. And then some people stayed and some people didn't. So, and like if the economy in a place crashes, then some people decide like, they want to move. Like, I think some of our parents, like my parents, they felt like there was a better life in the US, and then they kind of made that bet, right? So like, maybe the circumstances were different, but like the decision filters were in place. So they were like, okay, if I get an education overseas, then maybe there's better opportunities than staying where they were. So I think like for me, the current situation is the value of it is that it forces you to think about things that you don't normally think about when times are good, right? When times are good, then on a Friday night you're out with your friends, like you're out and about, like you're just living your life, and you may not have as much time to reflect. And like now so many people are like at home, right? Unfortunately some people are like don't have enough food. Then some people have enough food, but because they're locked in, their negative thoughts start giving into them, right? So like different people, different colleagues I've spoken to, now it's like once we've got that bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, so like, okay, we're all safe, right? Like it's not like we're not safe. There's no natural disaster, like there's not an earthquake or tsunami or whatever. And okay, many of us have food now, like finally. Then people are just thinking like, God, I have all these negative thoughts in my head, right? Because like you can't do the things that you normally do. And a lot of people are trying to cope through that. And, you can see like all these, different organizations are offering, like mental wellness, free consultations and stuff like that. Because people's inner voices are starting to get really, really, really loud because there's nothing to do. And then I've started seeing some people turn the corner and say, okay, you know what? Like, man, I've been through this. I'm separated from I know one friend who's separated from, her child, husband, everything. She's like, all alone. And she's like, like I've been so angry and so like frustrated. And then she's like, I'm just so sick of being angry and frustrated. I'm just going to focus on what I can do, right? I'm going to learn how to cook. I don't know how to cook. I'm going to figure out how to cook with the stuff that I have. I'm going to focus on work. I'm going to get better at all the things that I didn't have time for. And my own reflection from like, the quarantine time was that like now when things are so busy and you got all this stuff going on, like you kind of wish you had a little bit of like alone time and solitude, right? Like how you were saying, you were like, oh, I'm kind of looking before the real lockdown, right? And you were like, I'm kind of looking forward to it. But when you thought it was just going to be 2 or 3 days,
No,
like,
yeah,
I'm kind of looking forward.
day
Exactly,
two.
right?
Day two of
Yeah.
the lockdown, he was like, you know what? I kind of like this, guys. I'm really looking forward to this. Day two.
That's when he had
now we're
food.
on like what, day 20, day 30? It's like,
Yeah. That's when he had
I like
food
it, man.
and
I
shit.
mean, it's okay.
Yeah. So like, I mean, I will preface everything, right? Like I will preface this thing. Like I want to tell everyone, okay, everything I'm saying is assuming you have food. Okay. If you don't got food, then forget everything I'm saying. It's bullshit. All right. So like, if you don't have food, you need to get food and you need to fight and claw for it. Because I did have friends who were running out of food, couldn't get food. And I had to literally like call them up and be like, slap them upside the head. Cause they were like your friend, right? They were like becoming victim mentality. Like, oh, you know, the Jiahui is not helping me. No one in the group is responding. I'm just locked in. The delivery guy went to the front gate, but there's no way to get my food. I'm like, snap the fuck out of it. You fucking bust out of your door, go down, get the delivery and bring it up, dumbass. Like people were literally like fake starving to death.
There are, and I'm not trying to make light of people who are in real like dire situation, but like the three of us, we have a mutual friend, and he told us, like he even admitted to us, like he was fake starving to death because he owns all these restaurants in Shanghai.
He went into the
everybody
lockdown.
knows who it is, dude. You just gave it away.
He owns a bunch of restaurants in Shanghai, right? And he went into the lockdown.
Wait, what type of restaurants?
He went into the lockdown with like a really cocky mentality. Those were his words. Like he was really cocky. He's like, I own all these restaurants. I don't need to fight for food. I don't need to store food. I don't need to join all these group buys.
My
I'm too
staff
good
is
for
gonna
that.
bring.
Almost.
My staff is just gonna like bring.
I have all these
because I have an army of
foods at
people.
my restaurant.
Yeah, in the cold locker, right? In the walk-in that they can just grab for me. Little did he know that everything shut down. So that includes his staff, and his staff even got sick. So they can't deliver him food. And he finally ended up being like, oh, okay, giving in and joining like his like, you know, community and within his building
Group buys.
and joining some group buys and getting food. And now he's fine.
Yeah. Well, like, and you know, like, and I like, of course, like we want to apply, you know, like I am always deathly afraid of like saying something where people, you know, think I'm insensitive because I just try to think about these things, you know, and I am a very sensitive person. I take things very personally. So I try to, you know, I probably try to like hedge and caveat things too much. Right. But
You take
know,
things
like,
personally? I never noticed that. Never noticed that before.
Yeah. Never.
He's so sensitive.
I know. So I was like, you know, I was in the US for a while. Ended up getting stuck there, and I couldn't get back for a couple of months. And it was like, you know, it was quite difficult to get back. I mean, all the flights were canceled. And I was in a situation that was at that time, you know, probably 100 times better than pretty much anyone here. But I had the victim mentality like crazy, right? And every day I would just be like, I can't get back to China. You know, I can't get back to the haha monsters. Like I miss Justin and Howie. I miss the show. I miss the fans.
Now we know you're lying. We know you're lying.
I miss everything. Like, you know, like I'm in a different time zone. Like I don't, you know, working like the graveyard shift. Like, I mean, it was like, woe is me. Right. And like, I was in really, really bad mental shape. And when I look back, I'm like, a lot of it was self-inflicted. And yeah, you know, a lot of people know that I went through sort of a tough time, but I made it a lot worse. I made myself more miserable, you know, than it had to be. And my circumstances were great compared to now. Right. So I don't want to like, sort of make light of like people's circumstances here. You know, like if you're sick, you know, if you are unable to like access food and stuff like that. I mean, it's very, very, very difficult. Right. And some people are truly, truly struggling, but some of it is just because we live in a city that's the most convenient city in the world. And we have gotten a little bit soft as well, right? Because we're completely cut off. Like we are cut off from the source of what we do. Like, you know, we did shows about our trips to like Bali and to Yunnan and all that stuff. And people just like, you know, decided to leave the city life because they wanted to get closer to like what they felt was like really living, right? Like plant their own food and all that kind of stuff. We've become so separated from that. Everything is automated, right? Like technology is so fucking advanced. It's literally like the Matrix. I mean, we live in the fucking Matrix. You literally can just sit there with your phone and just order anything, right? And you can get anything delivered to you. You don't even have to like go downstairs. Like people probably like the delivery guy knocks on the door and they're like, don't even call me. Just leave it outside. Right. Like we've gotten so freaking lazy. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm really lazy. I get meal plans. Like we don't even have to cook anymore. Right. I don't even know where my food comes from.
Well, we've been so spoiled. We've been so spoiled to the point that we're so vulnerable now, right? Like you're saying, I think that's the point you're making. We're so vulnerable because any hiccup in the supply chain is like the sky is falling for us, right? And that's how like compromised we are because we basically have no survival skills anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah.
Yeah, I love what you said. Like we're so vulnerable, you know. So like now we're in this situation, and so like we feel like we're being pushed to our limits, right? But like we actually can probably survive for a little bit longer, you know. So I think you're right. Like the vulnerability is what we're seeing.
Is it right though? Is it right to have to go through this pain even though we're spoiled? You know what I mean? That's the conversation.
Well, you know, there's the term like 吃苦, right? And you know, I'll be the first one to admit to you that, you know, people in our generation and, you know, like myself in particular, like and you know, for people who grew up overseas, you know, we didn't really have to struggle. A lot of us didn't have to struggle, right? Like you know, I know lots of people have struggled. I probably didn't have to like 吃苦 as much as you know, as much as a lot of people. You know, look, and then you look at our listener and our listener base, and, you know, they're all over the world, but a lot of them grew up in China, and, you know, a lot of them are younger, and compared to, you know, their parents' generation, they probably had it a lot better. And so it was funny. I'll share a funny story from one of my friends. I don't think you've met Meng, but he is, shout out to Meng. He is Swiss Cambodian. So like, you know, he's born in Switzerland. So he's an expat, you know, family's from Cambodia. And, you know, his mom called him the other day, and his mom literally just like yelled at him. It's like, stop complaining. Okay. She was like, you don't even know what it was like in Cambodia back in the day. Okay. Like if two people saw a banana, they'd fight each other, kill each other, eat the banana, and then eat the other person. So stop complaining. You don't even know what it's like, right? And then my mom was saying the same thing. My mom's like, you don't even know. Like, I mean, it's like it's like how we would view like people like, you know, spoiled, rotten American kids. Cause, you know, we still grew up with an Asian background, right? We've talked about our, you know, our parents being strict and stuff like that. But when you think of that really just like prototypical, conventional, like American family, and the kid is like, you know, like that Russell Peters kind of stuff, right? The kid comes home from school, gets like a D, and like the mom's like, oh, Johnny, you did so good, you know? And so that's like a whole nother level, right? You take those people, you know, and then you put them under lockdown, and they can't even function. But it's I think it is like kind of helpful to look at it generationally as well, and say like, what does it really mean? And even before the lockdown, there were people in China that were starving, you know, and we're just not aware of those people. Like, I mean, truly starving. So I think it's important to kind of, you know, and during this lockdown, it's just been important to build, you know, relationships with your local community, right? You kind of had to fend for yourself. It's like, I think the term they used is called 自救, right? But, you know, I think that's a lesson for all of us.
Like pick yourself up by your bootstraps and you know, get it done, right? Like other people aren't going to come to your rescue. You got to rescue yourself. And
yeah, that's a big comment that a lot of people are saying, right? It's like, you know, we can't rely on the, you know, baba. You know, we got to rely on ourselves to pick ourselves up.
Well, that also gets into another topic I think is worth talking about, is about, you know, kind of maybe our experiences and what we've seen of, you know, communities here, like residential communities coming together, even the volunteers going out to help. What have you guys seen out of your communities? And has that been helpful to you? Have you seen people coming together? Have you seen people not coming together and just kind of like every man for himself? Like, what has been your experience in terms of like the communities that you guys are in?
I mean, I can share some stuff.
And like how I'd also like to add on to the question. So like, you know, just so that we get a more, you know, balanced understanding of everything. It's like, okay, what has your community been like? What's the dynamic? Because we hear all kinds of different stories, right? But like during this time, like it's really important that we all come together at that local unit level. And then I'm also curious about like what survival skills have you learned like during this period of time, like both from just, you know, being able to get food and being able to, you know, be, you know, to take care of your basic survival needs. And then like, have you used any sort of mental hacks to kind of be able to cope with like, you know, not being able to go out for weeks at a time? Like you've been in lockdown as long as anyone because you were in lockdown even before the lockdown.
Okay, well, first I was gonna answer about like my community. So I can actually point to a specific situation that happened around, I would say, 4 days, 5 days into lockdown. Um, I mean, I was very concerned about my own personal situation because I'll say it here. You guys know I was on lockdown within a lockdown. So I was quarantining myself from my wife because my business partner had COVID. He had tested positive a couple of days before lockdown, like a day before lockdown went down. And so just to be safe, I quarantined myself away from my wife just so she wouldn't get it. So I locked myself in this room, and which is like the side room, like a little like a sufang, and I basically stayed here for 10 days. And during that time, I mean, obviously, we're just concerned about our own safety and making sure we're secure enough food. But uh, at one point, I saw in our group chat, because in our community, you know, each building has a group chat with the Juhui, with the community leaders in it as well, to let everybody know what's going on and updates for COVID testing and stuff like that. So within that group chat, which in my building, there's about over 200 something people in the group chat. I saw this like elderly woman saying, somebody please, if somebody can see this message, I need help, right? And I saw like 50 messages go by with nobody responding to her. And I was like, whoa, you know, what's up with that, right? So I added her, and I was like, hey, what's up? What do you need? And then once I said that, then I guess other people caught on and was like, hey, yeah, what's up? What do you need? What do you need? That kind of stuff. And she basically said, I don't know how to do group buys. I don't know how to use all the apps. I don't know how to 抢菜. I don't know how to use like the, to 6 a.m. wake up early in the morning to like get the 下单 and get like the food. I don't know how to do that. I need help. And then so another neighbor immediately took the initiative and was like, okay, I'll help you, and then blah, blah, blah. I'll order double. I'll send some to you and stuff like that. Next thing you know, I saw all these other elderly neighbors start making comments being like, oh, thank you. I need help too. I'm the only person in my home, this and that. So we found that we had about like 5 different apartments of elderly that, needed help. And so next thing you know, people started bringing them into group chats, always checking up on them, like being like, we left you food outside your door, just grab it, that kind of stuff. So the community and the building stepped up, and it was an eye-opening experience that made me feel, it was a really like a moving thing for me, like to see it, because you really forget um people outside of your own circle, because when you're in extreme moments, you're only thinking about your own survival or your loved ones. But then you realize that everybody's going through it in this particular situation, and some of them may not have ears to hear their cries. So it got me pretty emotional, to think about these elderly that what if I was in that position? I'm not good with like WeChat. I thought of my father. My father sucks with like technology. If he was here and I was not available to him, dude, he would be lost, you know? And so it's just, I don't know, I got really emotional about it. And I started like posting moments about it, like check on your fucking elderly and stuff like that, as if I'm like holier than thou. But only because I got emotional, only because I really thought about my family, and and it made me glad that there are people stepping up to help them.
You know, it reminds me of something that, you know, I don't know why I always forget this, and it should always be on my mind. And, you know, it's this, like, why do we always focus on ourselves? Um, and Justin, I agree with you. Gratitude is a really powerful emotion, and you know, what's even more powerful is helping others. You know, because gratitude's still sort of about yourself, right? It's kind of like, okay, yeah, I'm really grateful for this, I'm grateful for that. You know, that's the first step, right? It's the first step to, like, not looking at your situation and turning every situation in a negative situation. But I think what's the most essential part of the human condition is actually thinking of others, and realizing that there's so many others that are, you know, like maybe just right around the corner, that are way more unfortunate than you are, and who may actually benefit from your help. Like, you know, and you kind of, when you look at your condition in relationship to these folks, it's like you can actually help them. And it's amazing, right? Because when we put all of our focus on ourselves, we become helpless to ourselves, we become helpless to others. And when we start thinking about others and finding that some small little thing we do can make a massive, massive difference, all of a sudden, like, we feel really, really powerful. And I've forgotten that sometimes. I have to say I'm not good enough to always remember that. But I think that's why we're here, right? As human beings, it's not for ourselves; it's actually to help others.
Yeah,
so, really powerful.
We have to keep reminding each other. I mean, not just us, because, you know, we're all friends, but just people around us. You know, you got to keep reminding it. It's too easy to forget.
What you said, Howie, about your community completely resonates with me. The fact that I have more than enough food and supplies really all started because of my community. And that started the moment that we decided to be proactive and join the community, right? Like had we never joined the community, because that's an action you have to take on your own. Like, no one's going to force you to join. And had we not joined, we'd be completely on our own, trying to figure everything out. And as we all know, in the very beginning of this lockdown, that was complete chaos, right? It was like no one really knew what to do. No one really knew how to get the food. It was a mess in the beginning. Now, thankfully, these channels are more established, and I think everything's settled down more or less. But I would not be here talking to you guys if it wasn't for the community. Like, they have really stepped up. They have, like, the people in our complex, in our building, like, we're all sharing things with each other. We needed dishwashing fluid the other day, and we, like, just popped it in the group chat. Hey, anyone have more dishwashing fluid they can give us? We can't wash our plates. And they're like, boom, right away. Vice versa. We have all these things that we have excess of in my apartment. We're throwing them into the group chat. Hey, who needs this? Who needs that? There's all this interaction going on, like, every minute. It's actually almost annoying how much interaction there is going on, because, like, my phone is, like, blowing up constantly. But it's great for survival because everyone is sharing resources. I have neighbors that have literally handmade me food and put it by my door. I mean, if that doesn't break your heart and touch your heart, like, I mean, nothing will, right? Like we're all really cooperative, which is amazing. And I don't want to take that for granted, because I'm sure not every community is like that. And so it got to the point where even me, I'm like, you know what? I gotta step up too. I don't want to just be take. Where now I've already volunteered a couple times to help, and to, like, when there's, like, heavy stuff. Like, the other day we had, like, all these cases of water, and, you know, like, these, like, 5-liter things in these cases, they get really heavy, right? So we had, like, a shipment of, like, 50 cases come in. And so I volunteered to go down and, you know, hand deliver each case to every unit in our building on every single floor, right? Like, things like that. And other things I do, and I help out where I can here and there. And Jessica, my wife, she also really has stepped up in, like, really being, like, a staple in the community in terms of, like, reaching out to people, helping people. I see a lot of there are a lot of foreigners in our building, and not all the foreigners are that great at reading Chinese. And so I've seen plenty of people, including, my wife, step in and take the time to translate a lot of things for these foreigners in these group chats so they can understand and help them with the ordering process and the group buys and everything. So it's really quite amazing. I mean, it really gives me a lot more faith in humanity, right? Like I always talk about like in private, I talk about like I just have like lost faith in like society. I've lost faith in humankind. But this has like really resurrected that in a big way. And not enough credit goes out to a lot of these community leaders. Like in our building, first of all, for people who don't know, there are community leaders. So basically, every apartment complex and building is made up of their own communities. And there's usually at least one leader or a couple leaders in there that kind of lead the way and lead the charge for the rest of the residents. On a separate side, there's also something called the 居委会. And the 居委会, I guess the closest analogy to that for Americans to understand would be like your neighborhood association. I think that's like the closest comparison. It's like a neighborhood association, right? And they kind of they actually have quite a lot of control, and depending on the kind of capabilities and willingness of your 居委会, like you might have a different experience throughout this lockdown as well. So they're an important piece. And on that same note, I think, a lot is made of, whether you're outside looking into China or you're in China, a lot has been made about like the dabai, right? Like the volunteers or the people in the white hazmat suits. I think that's like the most iconic image of especially Western media when they talk about the Shanghai lockdown. It's always a picture of the people in the hazmat suits, right? Like faceless people in the hazmat suits, right? And that's kind of like the image. And I mean, for anyone that doesn't know, the vast majority of these people in these white hazmat suits are volunteers. The vast majority of them. Some of them are police, some of them are officials, but the majority of them are volunteers. And most of them are volunteers that come from other cities outside of Shanghai. And they're donating their own time and efforts away from their own homes to come in and try to help people. Some of these volunteers are from residents within Shanghai as well, who are stepping up. And I think obviously with the amount of volunteers and people that we see, there are going to be bad apples within that bunch, right? And I think a lot of at least some of the videos that we see of some like really disturbing actions that some of these people in these white hazmat suits are doing in these videos, I think a lot of it is like definitely the bad apples in the bunch. Like really, like some of them are just like straight out like fucking really fucked up people, I think. But we can't use that same brush to paint that whole population of these volunteers, because it's really easy to criticize and judge and be like, oh, fucking lockdown, I hate this. All these fucking people, every day we're doing these COVID tests, like fuck these people. I mean, these people are really putting in a lot of work. So they're going through it too, right? And what's really also commendable are the people who are volunteering, like whether they are quote unquote agree with the lockdown or empathetic to it or not. I think it's like that idea that we mentioned before of picking yourself like, well, I'm in a shitty situation. What can I do to help? Instead of sitting on my couch, typing in these group chats and complaining and bitching and criticizing all day, am I actually going to do something to actually help the situation? And some people have. Some people have taken up volunteer rules, foreigners included, and volunteering and at least trying to help people, trying to make an effort to actually put in the work to make it a better situation instead of just complaining about it all day. And I think like that is a conversation that I don't see really happening nearly enough. Is bringing that to light.
What you're saying is that, I mean, this just goes back to what we were saying earlier in the conversation. It's easy to focus on those bad apples, right? They're a lot more like eye-catching headlines, and yeah, just like you said, there are, my community, the community leaders have been pretty good as well. In general, pretty good. So, yeah, I mean, what you're trying to do is kind of shine a little light on those people, on the people that are putting in their efforts, these volunteers that are putting the blood, sweat, and tears into helping everybody get through this. I mean, you can easily share stories from their perspective, probably, where they've had like pain in the ass residents that are stubborn or making their lives difficult. And if those start becoming viral, then the whole story changes. So yeah, it's easy to get caught up in that, and I think that what we're trying to say is that don't be caught up in that. It's like you kind of have to look at the bigger picture. I mean, we can only share our own personal experiences. So far, I've personally only shared only positive experiences, but I can also say another negative experience that we've had. So in terms of the supplies that everybody gets, I don't know how many have you gotten, Justin, but we've gotten so far 3 times during this whole lockdown.
What do you mean supplies?
And
Like the government packages?
yeah, those.
Yeah,
So
we've gotten 3 as well.
Okay, so we've gotten 3, and but in my building, everybody's sharing photos of their friends and whatever of the stuff that they've gotten. So the only thing we've ever gotten so far have been like 1 duck leg and like a carrot, like 2 potatoes and like a whole shitload of celery and cucumbers, and that's about it. Like nothing else. And then everyone's like, "Oh my god, this my friend's gotten like tissues and soap and beef and snacks, all runs the gamut." And how come we're not getting anything? We have a pretty good complex. Everything's under control. We're all obedient. Like, what's going on? And it's funny is because like the community leader just goes, "Look, I'm gonna be honest with you. Our community, our 小区, is is one of the nicer ones. So people are a little bit more well off here, and so because of that, all the food and all the stock has been pushed down to the people who need it. And unfortunately, that means that you guys, us, don't get as much, and the stuff that we do get are the bare minimum." And so it's funny is because like from his perspective, it was like he's trying to be like, he believes in that, right? He's like, everyone's kind of like, doing okay here. The group buys are going crazy. We're shipping a lot of stuff here. You don't need the government assistance kind of stuff, right? But then because he said that, you had a whole bunch of people in the building, especially the elderly, that they were like, "What the fuck kind of bullshit is that? Like, we're people too." You know what I mean? Like that doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? We need food too. So yeah, I don't know. It's just you can always focus on different stories. It's just what do you choose to focus on?
Yeah. And I think with with those care packages we're talking about, like the government care packages, it's not. I don't. From the people I've spoken to, with my understanding is that that's not really organized by the government, like by the Shanghai government. Like a lot of it is also dictated, and those goes back to what I was saying about the power that your particular jiedao or like your juweihui, your juweihui have, like your neighborhood association. Like they're the ones kind of dictating like what gets happened on a micro level. Like the government is more on a macro level, but on a micro level of like what your complex and your apartment building is getting and everything like that, that's actually handled and organized by like your local like neighborhood association.
Yes, you corrected me. So yeah, a lot of times in the group chat, they're like, what the fuck? Why is Changning Chu is getting all this amazing shit and Xuhui Chu is getting all this shit, but 我们的长寿街道 is like bullshit. Yeah, so
Yeah, honestly, for the government care packages, I don't like the things that I've been like. Here we are, like complaining about getting food, right? Like it's so fucked up. But like it's stuff that I wouldn't really normally eat anyway. but it's like I see that as more like, at least in my situation, because I am in a more fortunate situation, is that like the government stuff is actually just more supplemental, and it's really like the group buys that we're living off of.
yeah. Let's get a little bit more lighthearted for a second. Unless Eric, do you want to add to that topic at all, or no?
No, what I was thinking was, like with the lockdown, we've like basically the city has had to shut down a lot of different services, right? So when you create a policy where everyone has to stay at home, then like companies aren't working, like everything's sort of shut down, right? And then like what I was thinking when you were talking about the like neighborhood committees is that then what's happened is like with this like super duper reduced like operating capacity of the city, like people still have to like eat, right? They still have to like function, like stuff still has to happen because human beings have to like have to get their supplies, and like we have to like survive, right? So then what ends up happening is the Zhuweihui, the neighborhood committees, then are really the last mile, the last line of defense, and then they have to kind of mobilize beyond like their traditional function, right? And I think this is a relic of old, like kind of historically in China, like they had neighborhood committees for all kinds of different reasons, right? You don't really have that in the U.S., but you can imagine like a time when the world was organized like by villages and stuff like that, and so you didn't have like central government and all these things, right? If you read about probably more ancient society, even European society. And so they're organized in villages, and then each village is responsible for like adjudicating like disputes, probably getting food, like something like that, right? So it's really interesting to see like the neighborhood committees then like now having to play that really prominent role, because all the city services have been shut down. And then that puts a lot of pressure on the system. And as you guys were saying, like a lot of people have stepped up, right? And so these basic values of like kindness and like helping others and gratitude and that kind of stuff, you see it come into play. And we always talk about Blueprint, right? The book that talks about like how societies form and what the kind of the elements of a good society are. And so now you're kind of seeing things like break down, and then people have to kind of build it back up, right? And so like I've seen some of the same things, like some of my colleagues and my friends, they've like volunteered to be like the dabai. They've volunteered to deliver stuff to people's houses. And so I think it's really heartwarming to hear those stories. So I like I said, like I don't get so caught up, like I feel like when maybe you two are kind of maybe irritates you a little bit to see the negativity, right? And I can totally get that. I just try to stay away from it, because I like, for me to just be positive myself, I just have to naturally stay away from the negativity, because I just have a lot of innate negativity sometimes. But it's really just like, it's interesting to see like when you have this artificial force that kind of changes how the city runs, then it really pushes against everything in the city down to the individual level. So everyone's sort of feeling it in a certain way. And then people are coming together and being human beings, right? Like I think that's the nice thing, is that apart from all the structures and, the things that support us, the social safety nets, like we've all had to kind of come together and then, help each other. So like, no, I think it's really cool, Justin, that you and your wife are helping out as well. Like I haven't done a whole lot like in my community. I've tried to, like at work, I've tried to be like, supportive emotionally with people and just, sharing advice and stuff like that. But you can see it everywhere, right? Whether you're in a company and like a group chat. I would just say my advice would be like, look at all the groups that you're in, either at work or in your community, social media, whatever it is. Find all the ones that are creating value for the people in that group and stay in those, like people where people are helping each other. And then it's like where people are attacking each other or arguing or whatever, I just like peace out of those groups. But I think I've been lucky, like most of the groups that I've been in, have been pretty nice. And, hopefully like our Honest Drinkers group continues to think about how we can help each other if people need that.
And that's also another thing, like, before I was talking about like the foreigner situation as an interesting kind of data point to see following the lockdown. I think another, thing that I'm really hopeful about is to see whether this like neighborly love and this camaraderie that we're feeling right now through this lockdown will kind of carry over even after the lockdown. And like, are these communities, after we form these relationships, like this is the first time that we've actually known our neighbors. Like before that, I didn't really know any of my neighbors, especially not ones on other floors. But now, like, we know them and we're like direct WeChat friends, and we're like, direct messaging and going over and like, like, and sharing supplies and food and all this stuff. And, I'd be very interested in, and I'm very I'd hope very much that kind of carries over, because that would just make my community just that much of a better place to live.
For sure.
But it's also kind of maybe more realistic that maybe after the lockdown, kind of out of sight, out of mind, and everyone kind of just reverts back to how they were before. Like I could totally see that also happening. So I think I'd just be curious to kind of see how it goes.
Justin, it's a double-edged sword, right? Like, I think what this recent situation has shown us is like how dependent, like, kind of continuing that earlier line about like vulnerability, but like it also shows like how dependent we are just on society. And like society's become so sophisticated and we rely so much on, both the government infrastructure, and the private infrastructure. And so when you like kind of trace your path throughout the day, like taking the subway, taking a DD, going to a place, the electricity grid, being able to like all the food supply chains, like getting all the creature comforts, like we're just so dependent on others now. And it's all but it's all kind of anonymized as well, right? So you don't know the farmer that produces your stuff. Like you don't really know any of these people. And I think there is a charm to like being a little bit more self-sufficient. And, when we visited places in Yunnan and Dali, what we loved about it was that it was almost like that little village could kind of, is separated from the rest of the world. And they could kind of do their own thing. Of course, they had the internet and everything, so they weren't totally disconnected with everyone, but it's like they had the best of both worlds. And like, you go to the village and you would know it, like within 2 days you would meet everyone. You're like, oh, La Wang, oh, Justin, and you would know.
It's very community.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's self-sustaining. That's the most important thing. It's a lot of these communities are self-sustaining, which is, a very great concept.
How funny would that be as we regress back into like that kind of mentality? Right, where it's all about like the small like groups, of
like hunter gatherers, like we become hunter gatherers.
We're going backwards.
The honest gatherers.
Hey, there's some science that backs up that's actually the preferable way for humans to live is hunter gatherer lifestyles, but that's a whole different conversation.
Does it make sense for us to live in these large like anonymous metropolises? Right. Like, I mean, like our friend, like Brett, like he moved out of the big city because he wanted to go into like this more intimate setting. Right. And then, like, again, like with technology now, like you can kind of get the best of both worlds. So you can live in a fairly modern, beautiful place that has picturesque scenery, but then you can know who all your neighbors are. And then everyone has a maybe more simplified way of making a living. And then has a more direct way of contributing to the community. If you think about these large corporations we work in, we're all so specialized, right? And so like literally like this person only knows how to press a certain button on the computer, and this person only knows how to do a certain thing. And so like we're like individually we're almost useless and like kind of like completely unable to like survive on our own. But then collectively as a society we're more powerful than ever. But then recently some of this stuff just shows how vulnerable we are, right? Like what if all the power goes out, or what if the power grid someone hacks it, what if all the computers shut down? It kind of gives you a glimpse of like what would the implications be, like once things become too sort of connected and interdependent.
Yeah, I have a friend in the States, and I was talking to him just the other day, and he wants to buy up all this cheap land in Argentina to build a kind of like ranch, like a self-sustaining community. And I'm trying to convince him to do it in Dali. I'm like, come to Dali, man, do it there. I'll join you.
So we can all be a part of it, right?
Exactly. Like there's something to this, like that. It's really like enticing, right?
100%.
I think this is very counterculture. Like, so like, I don't know much about this topic, but it like, from what I like can recall, it's kind of like the 60s and 70s. And then like, what are they called? Like co-ops or cooperatives. Yeah. And they basically created like these autonomous communities because it was like, people just like rebelled against society. Right. And it was like the counterculture, the hippies, and I think you're starting to like, it comes in cycles and stuff like that.
I see nothing wrong with that.
All right, guys. Hopefully, if you're listening to this, that means you're doing okay. Anybody wondering? I think it's clear now that at least the three of us we're doing okay. We're doing fine. Like we said in this episode, reach out to people around you, people you know, extended network, see if they're doing okay, and see where you can help. Yeah, don't buy into all the division and negativity going around. That's not going to help anybody. And if you want to help, start taking some action and start actually helping. Yeah, that'd be kind of my final sign off on this.
Yep. And the one thing I share is like we're all, the three of us are in Shanghai right now, and we know that Shanghai isn't the only city in China being impacted at the moment, but like I've definitely had my ups and downs, like Howie, Justin, like we've all had our ups and downs, and like we all kind of experienced this lockdown in different ways, and like everyone, like there's no one that doesn't have like the down moments, so like we feel for everyone that's having a tough time, like we're going through it and all in sort of different ways, and we just hope that this thing ends as soon as possible, and but that there's some learnings from this as well that we can take into it when things do get back to normal. Like I don't want to be the same version of me, right? I want to like really appreciate things more.
Peace sign.
All right. Okay, guys.
Hey, should we do like a little heart thing? And then like, is it possible for you to do, like, can we do a screenshot while her hands are immobilized like this?
I mean, but this is dumb. Like, why are we like, stop it. We've completely ruined the ending, guys. The sign off.
We have completely.
Be good, be well, peace. Bye.
No, I got it. Okay, are you ready? No, Howie.